that and every conversation explores the art of thinking beyond the obvious. And today I have much special guests helping business leaders avoid the twin failures of weak governance and weak messaging. None other than Mr. John Cobb.
Hi, Daniel. Thank you for having me.
Welcome, Mr. John on Abstract Essay. And can you please introduce more about yourself that I missed?
Yes, my name is John Cobb. I am the founder and chief advisor at Tools Advisory. And what we do is we work with businesses, usually that are above $1 million revenue. And we help them with market entry challenges. And sometimes when there's crisis situations, we'll also step in and help them with that.
Yes, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world, Mr. John. Thank you. And today let's talk about why emerging economies break conventional playbooks. So tell us that
Sure.
Western companies often arrives in emerging markets with a playbook that worked in Cleveland and expert to work in Cairo. Why do sophisticated global companies repeat this mistake, and what is the cause of assuming business is business everywhere?
So really, what happens in a lot of these situations is that Western company will show up in an emerging economy and think things behave exactly the same way as they do in more developed country. Like a lot of Western companies, for example, expect the government to function smoothly. They expect things to be done in a timely manner, and that's just not the case in a lot of these other countries. Even for American listeners going across the border to Mexico, it's just a very different operating environment, and that's where a lot of developed countries, they
Mm,
skills and
interesting.
expectations over to an emerging economy.
Mr. John, you noted the booming middle classes. Yes, moving infrastructure, sometimes booming predictability. Not that much. If predictability is the foundation of most business models, how would you build that strategy when the ground keeps shifting?
So the thing is, you have to approach these situations with a lot of patience, and you need to lean really heavily on your local advisor. So after you get some experience in emerging economy, let's take Peru as an example. You're going to begin to pick up on trends and situations that happen. For example, in Peru, a big challenge with a lot of businesses there right now is the instability for the president. Now, they've had seven presidents in the last 10 years, and with no executive continuity, it's harder for businesses to plan and understand what's going to happen in the future, right? And the stability transfers down to the local levels of government too, because what is ordered to happen today under one president could change literally within the next month. And so there's this policy shifts that people always have to be aware of. But once you get a feel for how things operate, you can begin to strategically plan, foundation for these things. That's what I offer for a lot of my clients too. Is we go in and we really understand these local, the cultures, the local regulatory culture, and how people think and operate because it just changes so much from situation to situation. And there's only so many hours that we have in a day as people, so it's just tough to get the expertise. But there's a framework you can actually apply that can prevent a lot of this.
Hmm. Interesting, Mr. John. Your career spans region where the only constants is change. Eastern Europe, post-communism, the Middle East during transformation, Africa's rapid leapfrogging, what common threads run through these seemingly different markets that make them eligible to conventional analysis?
So the big thing I see is just with the sense of urgency that people move with, right? In Mozambique, where I do a lot of advisory work, uh, a lot of Westerners can be frustrated by the communication style because Mozambicans have a way of saying no, but it actually sounds like yes if you're not paying attention, and the pace is just a lot different, and that's because they had about 10, 15 years of planned economy rule during the Michelle administration, and that was just abandoned about 20 years ago. But in these sorts of post-command markets, that you'll see that the people still have some of the command economy traits, and they expect things to be done for them. And that also extends out to Latin America and markets like Mexico and Peru, where people just don't move with the same sort of urgency that they do in the West.
Hmm. Very well said, Mr. John. And you argue that multinationals often look at emerging market through the lens of risk rather than complexity. What is the difference between these two framings, and how does seeing complexity instead of risk change your strategic approach?
Well, the multinationals, they just have a series of boxes that need to be checked, like when they make an investment. And so what they do is they optimize for bad things happening in the future. But my approach is different in terms of complexity, right? So when I enter my advisory work, I view things as, kind of like a doctor. There's a problem that needs to be solved, based off of my experience. And so I don't take the approach in my advisory where I just kind of sit back and see what happens. I take more of a hands on approach, and I develop more of a comprehensive strategy that, helps businesses achieve better outcomes.
Mm, a better outcome, indeed. Mr. John, you have seen too many corporate strategy built on maps that were drawn 5 years ago in geography that changes every 5 months. How do you build strategy when your foundational assumptions have an expiration date?
So the really main thing, what I really enjoyed doing, is keeping a track on the local news. So I have a newsletter also on Substack that you can share with your audience, and that is the fullest report. But with that, I track all the local events. I have a personalized news ticker of 20 different countries that I currently advise in, and with that, I'm able to get a real sense of what's happening. Now, a lot of corporates, they don't invest the time or money into having infrastructure that gets the local pulse of the situation. For example, in Panama, they're having serious problems right now with the government, especially with the governing body that's in charge of issuing license plates for cars. So they set up a situation where it's impossible to comply because they just can't get plates to replace the old plates, right? And so, people who are operating in that market need to be ahead of the curve because when there's situations like that, there's going to be more, compliance and possible regulatory penalties that come in. And the main thing is you just got to pay attention. Just take a look and see what's happening around you, and then you can be ahead of the curve.
Mm, yes, indeed. So, Mr. John, you point out that infrastructure leapfrogging, like mobile money, digital ID, or renewable microgrids, means emerging markets often adopt technologies faster than developed ones. How does competing in a market that skip entire technological eras change the rules of customer acquisition and retention?
So again, that's just a mindset shift. I was advising a company that specialized in nutritional supplements, and they wanted to enter Peru, and they were expecting the local Peruvians to be, happy to put in their credit card information online on the website. But most people in Peru actually use a payment system called Yape, which is a mobile money service. And I was able to orient my client into using Yape, and they saw an immediate uptick in conversions. It's because there's a local stigma here around credit cards, and the interest rates here are just insanely high. So, unlike in the United States, people here are just happy to pay cash for everything.
Hmm, interesting. Mr. John, you noted that institutional voids, the absence of reliable courts, data, or supply chains, force companies to build capabilities that headquarters never imagined. When do these forced adaptations become competitive advantages, and when do they become unmanageable distractions?
So, it depends on the situation, right? Again, um, you have to look at where the government is currently at in terms of operating. So if they've gone through more of a painful transition process, and the institutions really aren't there, then the government is going to be less receptive, and the local people will be less receptive to innovation. But if it's a situation where things are kind of steady state, they're calm and everything, people are going to be more receptive to innovation because their world hasn't been shaken so much.
Very well said, Mr. John. You emphasizes that informal economy is not a bag. It's a future in many emerging markets, often representing 50 to 80% of economic activity. How do you compete with the with or serve customers who exist entirely outside formal systems?
So there's a few ways that that can be approached. Now, for those customers, you have to, for a market entry strategy, that's the first angle I'd like to touch on. You need to be familiarized with how people like consuming their information, right? So to have a successful market entry into a new country, it doesn't really matter if the people are, if there's a high level of formality if you're doing a consumer good. Now, if you're going business to business, that's kind of the opposite situation because the people are going to have less experience doing with contracts, and you're going to run into a lot of obstacles that just seem more frustrating from a Western standpoint because there's a lower level of trust. But with direct to consumer marketing and for physical goods and everything, with a local distribution channel, the informality doesn't matter as much as it does in a business context.
Hmm. Mr. John, you observe that family, tribe, and community are not background noise. They are the operating system. How do multinational build on principle of individualism and impersonality adapt the markets where relationship is the currency and trust precedes transaction?
That is less important in terms of like a market entry strategy, but it definitely shapes how people, handle their interactions on a daily basis within the organization. So, what you're going to need to do in those situations is, again, pay close attention to the local dynamic. The most successful executives who transition from a Western type country or a more formal economy, more formal employment, more developed are the executives who uh, are better at listening, right? So I usually advise my clients just to listen as much as possible and then to begin to understand the local power dynamics. And then they can have improved outcomes in these emerging economies.
Hmm. So, what does the middle class even mean when consumption is soaring but formal employment is not? If conventional market segmentations models fail, how do you identify and serve emerging consumers?
So for formality, that's a big challenge that we're dealing with here in Latin America, especially. I'm calling in from Lima, Peru today, and the governments are trying to make it easier to be formalized, right? So you know you're gonna need to just really refine your messaging. The middle class does exist in emerging countries, and that's something that Western and developed world executives need to understand. And it's going to look a lot different in in the United States, but the middle class does exist. So you have to meet them where they are in terms of messaging. You really need to present information in a local way that's palatable, and it's also a good idea to have your local advisors and they'll be able to orient you on how to approach the middle class in your target market.
Indeed. So, Mr. John, tell us. You argue that local talent is not just cheaper, they are smarter about the context. Why do multinationals still parachute in experts? And what do they lose by under investing in local leadership?
So local leadership is there's a lot of stuff just by being a local to somewhere. By spending a lot of time, you understand the feeling and the rhythm of a place, and you have a unique perspective that other people aren't going to have. What I usually recommend is that companies have a hybrid approach, right? For skills and everything, you'll need to bring in some outside information because something like tech or marketing is pretty transferable, but you'll absolutely need the local help. You need the local help in legal areas, right? Because laws change from country to country, and you'll need them in the finance areas, definitely. That's the sort of localized stuff that you can't change. And then in terms of management and everything, if you're having a local team, you'll need to find a candidate who is, skilled at adapting between the local situation, the local realities, and the more developed realities, or from whatever target country the executive is coming from, because they'll need to be able to bridge the gap. There's been situations where somebody is just too local, and they get offended, or the developed world person comes in and they get angry and they start shouting, and that's just not acceptable in the local area, and it creates a lot of tension. That's why you need to have both, and the diverse perspectives ultimately make the team stronger.
Very well said, Mr. John. So, you've seen companies succeed by building the market before building their product, investing in education, infrastructure, or policy before ever making sale. How do you justify these pre-competitive investments to a board focused on immediate ROI?
In this situation, you're going to want to get the money to come in as quickly as possible. So I usually advise in market entry context that you build as quickly as possible, and you try to get the money to come back as quickly as possible, because a project, you can spend millions of dollars, but if the local market doesn't accept it, then that's just money down the drain, and that's not good. So for market entry, it's always best to come in as lean as possible, and I always recommend investing a bit with a local expert who can help make sure that your marketing is received appropriately, because there's even between the United States and the UK, there's language differences and different ways of phrasing things that we do, and there can be even misunderstandings between two very similar cultures. So you're always going to need to, first try to recover money as quickly as possible. But before to do that, to control risk and ensure that you have a successful launch, you're going to need to work with a local expert just to make sure everything functions, and just operate as lean as possible. Don't spend a lot before you are absolutely certain you can recover.
So, Mr. John, tell us. You noted that partnership in emerging markets are not about sharing risks. They about accessing reality. What does it mean to access reality through a local partner, and why can headquarters simply buy better market research?
So, with a lot of market research firms, they're just completely clueless as to the local realities of the country, right? They sit behind a desk and they don't actually engage with people. And that just, it's a way to spend a lot of money, because those market research firms are, they're very, very expensive. A lot of established firms to get into, you can get like just repackaged consulting information, a fancy looking PDF. It's starting at around $100,000, and that's just a lot of money, really, for the majority of organizations. So you're going to need to work with a local company, or a local who understands these things, who can present some information that gets the project across the goal line. And a lot of times, I've seen companies, you know, develop campaigns, and then the local person comes in and they'll say, "Hey, this is where your messaging is failing." And once they implement the local person's change, it's night and day in terms of campaign performance.
So, Sir John, to wrap up our discussion for today, a final challenge to leaders. Are you building a business that works in this market, or a business that works despite this market? What's the difference, and why does the answer determine whether you still be there in a decade?
So the ultimate goal between that is, you're going to want to build a business that functions in the market, that adheres to the local uh, guidelines and the local norms. Because if you build a business that works despite the market, eventually it's going to fail. Eventually it's going to collapse, and the market is going to tell you that your business isn't a good market fit.
Certainly, Mr. John, can you please invite our listeners to support your advocacy, your business, or whatever project that you're doing right now?
Yes, I've got two places where you can learn more. You can visit my website, which is pholus.co. That's pholus.co. I'm also on Substack with the Pholus Report. So just type that in on your Substack, and you can subscribe to my newsletter. I'd appreciate it.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. John Cobb, because if you support him, for sure, more and more empowering business like this to rise. So, Mr. John, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Daniel. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise, so more time, people. See you soon.